You know, my Rebbe used to say it's good to do yoga under a highway because the ambient noise just enriches the yoga, and the ambient car enriches the Torah.
Could you tell us three things your father
Okay. Shabbat Shalom and Moadim L'Simcha. It's so fabulous to be with you. We are here in the gazebo tent for our service this morning and also for our Talmud class this morning. Our beloved colleague Elias is at a bar mitzvah of a family friend from Argentina, so it's the four of us. So let me just jump in to the frame, and then we'll say Birkat Torah and then get going. The question is, where is the holiday for settling the land? This was Micha Goodman's observation in his Deuteronomy lectures on the Tikva Fund, which is there is a holiday for getting out of Egypt, and there is a holiday for getting the Torah at Sinai. And there is the holiday we're now in the midst of observing of God's protecting us in our wilderness wandering. But there's no holiday for actually God's fulfilling God's repeated and explicit promise to the patriarchs. To Abraham, he promises this. To Isaac, he promises this. To Jacob, he promises this. To Moses, he repeats this, which is, I'm going to give you and your descendants the land of Israel. And it's a leitmotif. It's a through line of the 5 books of Moses. And there is no holiday to mark it. And furthermore, as you know, Simchat Torah is coming up this week. The 5 books of Moses, as we all know, end with the Israelites on the wrong side of the River Jordan. And what we're going to start off with today after Birkat Torah is there is a text which says God delivers. And there is a text that says God actually gave us the promised land like God promised, but nobody ever reads it. Hey, here's a question for you. If anyone has ever seen these texts before today, please email me. I am betting that 100% of the people on this call have never seen Joshua 23:24. So the one passage where it says God delivers, nobody ever reads. It's clearly a much lower level of sanctity and importance in the Jewish canon, and the question is why? So with all of that, we are going to thank God for the gift of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael, v'niyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzai amcha beit Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai, hamalamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai, noten Torah. So, Eliza, good morning, and Michelle, good morning, and Dan, good morning. So, we're going to have 2 real foci for our conversation today. The first one is going to be Joshua 23 and 24, and I'm just going to read a few portions of it. And then the first question is going to be, why is this not in the Torah? Why is this in a text that nobody ever reads? So this is Joshua 23. Joshua's about to die, and he says the following. I'm just going to read it, okay? I am now going the way of all the earth. Acknowledge with all your heart and soul that not one of the good things that the Lord your God promised you has failed to happen. They have all come true for you. Not a single one has failed. Right? So God made all these promises in Genesis, etc. And Joshua 23 says God delivered. And then if you look at Joshua 24, the final chapter, what you have here, and it's just so interesting, I just find this utterly interesting, is you have a biblical history of the people of Israel in the last chapter of Joshua, Joshua 24, and it starts with Abraham and Terach, etc., and it replays the familiar story of Abraham and going down to Egypt and the slavery and the plagues and the redemption, okay? And then verse 11, then you crossed the Jordan and you came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho and the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites fought you, but I delivered them into your hand. And the rest of the book talks about how the 12 tribes now have allocations in the land of Israel. God fulfilled God's promise. They crossed the River Jordan. They entered Israel. They settled the land. God is good. God delivers. And the Israelites at last have their land. And now here's my question. And again, if any one of you has ever read these chapters before, 23 or 24 of Joshua, please email and let me know. My operating assumption is nobody ever reads it. And so the question is, but the ones that we do read, of course, the Israelites never get in. So the question must be asked, whoever you think wrote the Torah, whether it's God who wrote the Torah or the redactor, if you like biblical critique, JEPDH, etc., why is the fact that God fulfilled the promise not at the higher level of sanctity and importance? Anyone?
I actually want to start this. The Moshe Greenberg Understanding Exodus passage.
Yeah, we're going to get to Moshe Greenberg.
Okay.
We're going to, right. So, okay, fair enough. So let me just say. So Moshe Greenberg is this Israeli scholar that we're going to read at the end.
Okay.
Because I was discussing this with my father-in-law, could never come up with an answer. My father-in-law directed me to this Moshe Greenberg book, which we're going to do. But this is before we read Moshe Greenberg, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. Just if you were just reading this on your own, what would you say is the reason why it's not included?
For me, it's really interesting because this list is included in our daily davening. And so it doesn't have a holiday landing page, but it does actually have a daily landing page. And in Jewish tradition, interestingly, the things that are most regular are more holy than the things that are special, right? Like Shabbat is on a higher level than Sukkot because it happens every week and it has a higher level of holiness. So I think that there's a way in which the fulfillment of God's promise lands every day in our morning liturgy as a daily reminder of the potential of God realizing God's covenant with us.
And I'll piggyback on that and say it's not only in our liturgical system, it's also in our halachic system. Because if you read from this book, the entire premise that so much of our halachic system is based on of the idea that you would never deviate from the right or the left, that you should follow these good laws all of your life, is actually a huge foundation of Talmudic thinking. And so I think both on the spiritual scale and on the halachic scale, Joshua is reflected all through our tradition.
But Michelle, if you're using a halachic lens, there are all of these laws that can only be done in Israel. Yeah. All the Shemitah and the Yovel, not to mention all the korbanot at the place where God will cause God's name to dwell, Jerusalem. So there's all these laws that are land specific. Hence, one would think that the fact that we have the land should be part of the story.
Well, I think actually it's inherent in this text itself. If you look on page 373 that you brought us, right after you finished reading the beautiful passage that you read about how all of these things will come true, you get all of these things. If you don't do them, you will be punished, right? He has fulfilled all of the good things.
Right.
He has punished all of the bad things. And if you break this covenant that the Lord has enjoined upon you and you go to serve other gods, well, guess what? You're going to quickly perish from the good land that he has given you. And so every piece of the land, every piece of the promise of the land that we get is actually temporary and conditional. This is opposite of unconditional love. This is completely conditional, and it's on you. So the fact is, yes, I'm giving you good laws that you should do in that land, right. But I'm also imagining a time when you're not in that land and you're not going to be able to fulfill these particular laws, and so I've given you others that are outside of the land also.
Right. I mean, this is consistent with Moses' sermons throughout Deuteronomy. If you do the laws, you get to keep your homeland. If you don't do the laws, you'll get expelled from the homeland, right? But it's, to me, still does not scratch the fundamental itch, which is you have 5 books that are all about, I'm going to take you out of Egypt and into the land of Israel. And the actual arrival of that in the land of Israel is narrated in a book that nobody ever reads, and the book that everybody reads and honors and dances around at Simchat Torah has us on the other end. And just as we're about to enter in the book of Joshua, which nobody reads, we head back to Genesis. So, Dan, what do you have to say about this?
I was going to say, so we're all skirting your question. You know, we're saying, oh yes, there's daily holiness, but it doesn't answer the question, why isn't there a like a Yom HaAtzmaut kind of
Yes,
thing for the
that's
you know,
the
for
question.
you
Why
know,
is there
for
no Yom
ancient-
HaAtzmaut in the
for-
Bible?
for ancient
But
times? So it's a good question, and you know, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not really sure about an answer about
Right.
why there isn't a holiday, but I think that Michelle is getting at the sense of conditionality, and the conditions of the land, the conditions of being in the land, are different than the other covenants that we have. So God promises Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moshe, here's what's going to happen. You are going to go to this land. You're going to go to the promised land. And there's no conditionality to that. There's no conditionality to those promises. So again, we're skirting the issue.
Well-
If there's no condition, Abraham, your children will be descendants. We're going to the land. There's no condition.
But
So
okay,
Dan,
yeah.
here's what I say. First of all, I'm going to disagree with your contention that there's no holiday, right? We actually do have a holiday. On Shavuot, we bring our first fruits, which is about celebrating being in the land. Okay, so I actually think on a liturgical calendar, we do have an address for that. What we don't have an address for is we are in this land. We are 1,000% here forever and ever. And I think it comes back to that verse that I just read, which is actually and it's one of the most profound teachings of our Jewish tradition, which is that you actually never get there. We talked about it last week when we were learning together with Moses, that actually there is a process about our lives, and it's certainly true in our individual lives, it's true in our national lives, that you don't get to count on the things that you have for now.
So we're going to get to Moshe Greenberg. I want to just summarize the state of play of the explanations so far. One is what Michelle just shared, which I'll call the asymptote theory. You know, that's that move from ninth grade trigonometry, if that's what they're still, or whatever geometry, where you're reaching for the axis but you never get there. And here we're reaching for the axis, but we never get there, right? And so the Torah ends with an asymptote that the human condition for Jews and for humans and for Israelites and for Israelis, right, is we're reaching for the asymptote, we're reaching for the axis, well, and that's what we never get there. And the Torah dramatically concretizes that we're all asymptotes, that we never fulfill by snapping back to Genesis and not giving us Joshua as part of the most sacred part of the canon. That's one move. A second one, I just want to suggest, and what goes along with that, just by the way, the corollary is what's most important is striving and seeking. It's that whoever it was who said to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Whoever it was that said that, I remember studying that in the 10th grade. That's what this is about, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. It's about this journey. It's about the search, not the destination. That's one move. The other one, I just wanted to lift up what Van Langton mentioned at services, which is perhaps Van suggested that we don't make a Simus out of it, a holiday out of it, because of the moral complexity. If you read with 2021 eyes, right? Then you crossed the Jordan, you came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho and the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites fought you, but I delivered them to your hands. And Eliza, what you're talking about in the daily liturgy, which is I kicked out all the 7 Canaanites and I gave you the land, that causes some reserve, squeamishness, pick your noun, for 2021 eyes. I don't, and that was Van's suggestion about moral complexity. For what it's worth, I think that's a very fair read for 2021. The Bible has no such complexity. The Bible seems to glory in it, and again, Rashi's first comment about the beginning of the Torah, why does it begin with God created the heaven and the earth so that God could take the land from the Girgashites and give it to us? So the Bible doesn't have that compunction, but we do. So we have two theories so far, the asymptote, it's to strive, to seek, to find, perhaps moral complexity. I want to just, this one took my breath away, which is Moshe Greenstein. So Moshe Greenberg. So again, if you haven't read it, this is very short. It's super short, super sweet. Here's what he says. I'll just frame it and then read it. The Torah doesn't talk about settling the land of Israel. The 5 books don't, because the land of Israel is actually not that important. It's fourth on the list. It's not first on the list. It's not even second on the list. It's not even third on the list. That you'll read Moshe Greenberg and you'll see whether you think that what I'm saying is a fair rendering of it. But that the land of Israel is just not that of first importance central. It's kind of a fourth importance central. This is what Moshe Greenberg says. I'm quoting him now. The Torah thus ends with Moses' death, because by that juncture it has related all that is needed to provide the rationale for Israel's way of life. Since the way consisted of a life bound by God's covenant, it need tell only those events on which the covenant obligation rested. The story of the conquest could be left out, since settlement of the land was not such an event then. The idea that the covenant obligation took effect prior to and independently of the land taking had fateful consequences. Thanks to it, when the kingdom of Judah fell, the Judean exiles were able to conceive of the covenant's validity even when they were no longer in the land. It was a bold and unprecedented thought, but it had its roots in the Torah itself. Just as the obligation was independent of the land taking before Israel came to the land, so it could be again after they had been exiled from it. And just as keeping the covenant was a condition of possession of the land before it was conquered, so now it was conceived to be a condition of its repossession. There is thus an integral relation between the exclusion of the book of Joshua from the Torah and the covenant surviving the exile, between the idea that the covenant took effect even before Israel took their land and the decision made by the exiles still to be bound by the covenant even after they had been expelled from it. As I'm reading this, and I want to hear all of you read, well, why don't I just ask you, what, in your opinion, what is he saying? Because to me, it's kind of a shocker. Dan, what is he saying?
What he's saying is exactly what you just said. Is that that the land, we could wait 100 years for the promise to be fulfilled. We waited for the land, but our covenant with God is the covenant of God taking us out of Egypt. That's the basis of the covenant, and once we accept that and then obey God, no more be said than that. We don't have to wait for the next part of the promise.
Okay.
I think that's part of what I was reading it anyway.
If I hear you correctly, and Michelle and Liz, I want to get your voices here, what I hear him saying, if I can just speak straight, is the land is just not that important. Or put it another way, the land is of not tertiary importance, because I think tertiary is 3. It's of fourth importance, quaternary importance, right? That the land is not that important. What's important is the covenant, and we had a covenant with God before we had land. We had a covenant with God after we had land and were expelled from land. The land comes, then the land goes. We had a first commonwealth, we had a second commonwealth, now we have a third commonwealth. But in between all those different landed periods, we still had a covenant. The land is thus not of crucial importance.
And I think that's
what he's saying.
Yeah, and I think that's what allowed us for all those times we weren't in the land to survive. Because we were able to say we have the covenant with God. We can create the mikdash ma'ad in our homes.
Right.
We can, all of that. We can create Judaism without having the land.
So I want to just and then Michelle and Elisa, but to put Greenberg on the table, right? It's a shock to me. It's shocking. I mean, the asymptote is lovely and kind of innocuous. The moral complexity of stealing the Girgashites' land is like so 2021, okay? But here he's saying that excluding Joshua from the covenant was very by design, and this is what Greenberg, by the way, he teaches for like 25 years at Hebrew University. He's like got ultimate street cred for an Israeli Jewishy Bible scholar. He's teaches Bible at Hebrew U in Jerusalem until his dying day, okay? And he's saying that Joshua is excluded from the canon, the highest part of the canon, specifically to diss the importance of the centrality of land. That to me is a shocker. How did you guys read it?
So I think I love what he's saying. And I love it for 2 reasons. I love it because on the one hand, we have a brilliant theology in Jewish tradition, which is not reliant on the land of Israel. I think he's really getting at something there. You can practice, as Dan says, wherever you are, in Poland and Eastern Europe and Yemen. The Torah is the Torah. You carry it with you. The covenant you commit to goes with you. And I find that to be one of the most brilliant and enduring and sustaining theologies of our Jewish tradition. So, I mean, who am I to argue with him
Right.
on that? I do have a tweak to what you're saying, though, because I don't hear that as therefore the land is not that important. I actually hear it as therefore the land is of ultimate importance, because in a sense you need the land out there as the lure, as the drive, as that place that you're always sort of looking to tomorrow for. And this was a big challenge when our people came to Israel again in the modern era, right? What do we do with all of this longing that we've built up, the hatikva of our souls that we need when we now have an actual land that we have to be a part of? There's something theologically and spiritually and sociologically really helpful about having a set of values that don't have you have to get your hands dirty in an actual land.
Okay. Elisa, your thoughts?
I think I'm somewhere between the two of you in that I think that, and this is speaking about the importance of elements in a religious theology, I think not necessarily just about the overarching importance of the land to the Jewish people. And for the theology, I think that what is important is the setup. You know, it's in some ways like when you get married, you don't agree on where you're going to end up together. You agree on a premise of how you fell in love and on your love story up until the point that you get to the chuppah and you're standing under the chuppah with a couple and you know this much of their story, and God willing they're going to have 50, 60, years together to build that story and build that love, and what evolves from it wasn't what made them decide to get married. And so that, to me, that's like what he's saying is our love story with God isn't predicated on where we're going to get. It's predicated on how we fell in love.
Okay.
But I think that the end story of your marriage, right, is also crucially important, as you were saying. So I'm sort of in between.
So I want to just throw out here. Moshe Greenberg is a genius on Bible, and who am I to quarrel with anything he says? But I have two significant problems with what he says. Okay, to me, this whole issue raises up how important is the land of Israel, the state of Israel, the homeland of Israel? How important is Medina Israel to the Jewish people, to our present and to our future, right? So I want to just answer first, like, at Bain or McKinsey, I want to be answer first. Here's the answer. The answer is there's no Jewish people without the Jewish state. There's no Jewish future without the Jewish state. No Israel, no Jews. No Israel, no Jewish homeland, no Jewish future, okay? We need oxygen. Our people needs Eretz Israel. Not only the land of Israel, but the state of Israel and the people of Israel and the Israelis, our brothers and sisters. We need that to have a future. Okay, that's the answer. Okay, now, and for two reasons. One is no Jewish homeland. We just are dead. You have dead Jews. No Israel means dead Jews. That's just Jewish history for the last 2,000 years. If you ever go to Europe, and if we ever travel again to Europe and you do Jewish tours, at every place you go in Europe, the Jewish tour is the same. This is where the Jews used to live. This is the Museum of the Jews. This is where the Jews used to live. This is where they were persecuted here and massacred here and ghettoized here and expelled there. You go to, Rome and you get a nice, Kiddush cup, but here was the ghetto where your forebears were stuck. Right, and it's that version. You go to Gironda. Oh, this is where they had disputations. I mean, Europe is a graveyard for the Jews, and Europe is a picnic compared to Poland. Right, so no Jews, no Jewish state, no Jews. So I'm really troubled with this. But even beyond the physical thriving, just for the covenant, just thinking about the expression of religiosity and Judaism, it's so rich in Israel. Right? It's not just that there's a physical survival, but it's an emotional and spiritual survival, that Judaism thrives best in the Jewish homeland. Right? Israelis have a comparative advantage. They speak Hebrew. right? They speak Hebrew. They get Hebrew. This is like all native tongue to them. We don't really get Hebrew. We don't speak Hebrew. We spend our whole life trying to study Hebrew. We never really get Hebrew. They just grow up speaking Hebrew. They get Jewish texts in a deeper way. You just can't argue with that. And even secular Israelis get Jewish texts in a much deeper way than we ever can. And Judaism thrives, thrives, bold, exclamation part, underline. So both physical survival, spiritual survival, hinge on a homeland. So I can't abide a thesis that disses the importance of a homeland.
So
I
we have a
need to
missing
jump in.
chair.
I need to jump in. I need to
Yes.
jump in. I'm sorry. I 100% agree with you, but this when we're sitting here on Ward Street, the cars are going by, we're on this gazebo. Why are we here? Israel is so important. Why are we here? Why aren't we in the land of Israel? Why aren't we living there? Why do we have a diaspora at all? I'm thinking about it. I don't have an answer for that.
Well, it's an and, not an or, Dan. I mean, the diaspora has
I don't
always
know.
been an
I mean,
and, not an or.
but should it be an and?
Right.
Should
so,
it be in it?
So
That's a different
that
question.
of course is the eternal question. But I'm mindful that we have a missing chair here.
Okay.
And missing socks.
And missing socks and missing a little bit of
We
humor
get the socks,
here.
yeah.
So while you were talking, all I could think of, Wes, is we have that moment that used to happen on when the Israelis teenagers would come to our shul.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
Right?
Oh, can
And
I
the
be one? Can I
Israeli
be
teenagers would look at us like we had 7 heads. Like they had that beautiful accents when they came up to do
Right.
I will give them that.
Right.
But these kids had never been in a shul before, nor did they understand the concept of covenant or Jewish obligation. They understood culture. They understood, they certainly could read this book. But I don't think that there is, at least in Moshe Greenberg's words, I don't actually think that it's an either or. I think what he's actually saying here is that just as the obligation was independent of land taking before Israel came to their land, so it could be after they had been exiled from it, meaning it's both. It works in both places. And so, calling up our colleague, right, his whole life was shaped in Argentina, in a very vibrant diaspora. And the fact is that the book of Joshua, we need it. We need it as part of our story, and it can't be our only story because history moves in different ways, and there are many ways
Right.
to thrive as Jews and to hold on to the covenant and move it forward.
So I agree. Obviously, I agree with all that you say. Diaspora Judaism is critically important. That's what I am. I always have lived in America, until we retire and Shira gets that chapter and we move to Israel in retirement. We're going to live in Newton, the diaspora. Obviously, the Talmud was in the diaspora. Sinai was in the diaspora. Obviously, diaspora is critically important. It's an and, not an or. But those teenagers who come here, used to come here before COVID, who have never been into a shul, when they're 25, they are studying at Micha Goodman's Beit Prat, and then they get Judaism in a deep way. And when you go, Micha has the holidays in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. He has literally thousands of those 7th graders, 18 years later, or however many years later, they are thriving in synagogues or in amphitheaters where they have 500, 600, 700 people doing really passionate services. So all I'm saying is there's a trajectory, and that Judaism in Israel is tremendously vibrant and tremendously rich. And not only Haredi Judaism, but secular Jews finding that basically their own version of Masorti, of tradition and change. And so it's an and my modest point is if it's an and, if we love diaspora, which we do, we're here, we love it, and we love Israel, which we do, both should be in the sacred canon, and the land part is lopped off.
But they both are. I think very much I'll let you take the microphone here because this is really your point, that we actually do have a through line throughout all of our prayers. We're always praying in every single service about our connection to the land of Israel. Yeah, take it away.
Well, to me, and this is where I think that the marriage metaphor is really helpful, because like, you know, the wedding industry is designed to make you believe that your wedding is the most important part of your relationship, and that's just not true. And I think that settling the land is in some ways just a wedding, right? It's not building the relationship, and it's not fulfilling the relationship. It's just one moment in time. And I don't see him saying, right, he's not saying that the land doesn't matter. He's not dissing the importance of the land. I think he's just saying that moment, that the ceremony, like where you have your reception doesn't matter, your colors don't matter, like don't spend all your time stressing about this one day of your life, because the real project is your marriage. He's saying the project of Judaism is the relationship we have with God, is with our covenant, it's with the people, and that's not a project that happens in one moment. And if we elevate that moment of coming into the land, we lose track of the really important values that got us there.
Okay, so that's where the conversation is. I just want to say, Elisa, you and Solomon, I have no doubt, I've not been to your apartment, but you and Solomon must have a wedding album, and every couple that you've ever married who is working on their marriage has a wedding album. My modest point is, I think the wedding album is in the attic, not in the living room. Okay, but here's the next question. Here's that I want to end with, which is, can we bring this whole conversation to the weird, bizarre, surreal, not post-pandemic, continuing pandemic age? What does all of this? What's the message of Sukkot? What's the message of the end of the holiday season? What's the message of the asymptote? What's the message of moral complexity? What's the message of, the covenant can be grounded in the land or not in the land? To the Jewish people of Temple Emmanuel in 2021 with an ongoing pandemic?
Resilience. We have a vision, a place, a dream, a home. It's critically important. Agree with you.
Yeah.
And we have the ability to thrive where we're planted.
So I want to just lift up something, and we haven't had this conversation explicitly in public yet, but I think our Holy Temple is changing in real time in ways that nobody has really been able to wrap their head around, because it's just so new and it's so evolving. But we used to be primarily an in-person community, right? And now we are a little bit in-person and mostly online. Like a little bit in person and mostly online. So like Sukkot used to be, now maybe I'm embellishing, like the Israelites had free cucumbers and melon and, and leeks for free in Egypt. Maybe I'm embellishing, but I kind of remember like we used to have 250 people on Sukkot inside, and we had 50 or 60 outside for the first day and 30 the second day. But then when you see other people online, it's the same number. So it's a little bit in person and it's a lot online, and it seems like it's going to be that way kind of indefinitely. So I'd love your thoughts about how do we continue to thrive where the landscape has changed dramatically? And again, what does the end of this holiday season say to us on that question?
So I love the idea. We amongst us have been talking about the fact that this is like the year 71, right? In other words, we in a certain way have to recreate what it means to be a Jewish community. Our rabbis of ancient times really created the whole, you can daven wherever you are and create a holy space wherever you are. The Hasidic masters did the same thing. And we are in the middle of a pivot. We're in the middle of a pivot. We are basically trying to be Tom Brady fourth quarter, coming again, yet again with another rescue. And how do we do that? And I don't have an answer, but we're 30 years from now we'll know what the answer is.
But this is where I love Greenberg.
Yeah.
Because the point of the story isn't settling 385 Ward Street. It isn't the number of people that are coming in here, and it isn't the number of times. The point of the story is the project. And it's the really creative, thoughtful way that we have to reimagine what it means to be a Jewish community and a spiritual community, and what it means to building content, and what it means to build community, and what is community. And it is community, something that you can have where you don't actually get together in person. And how do we imagine that? How do we build that? And if we keep our goals straight and we keep the covenant straight, then radical change is totally possible, and we can end up, what my Rebbe would say is backwards compatible. Like, you always know then when you land in the right place in the future, if you can look back and see a trajectory that connects you all the way back.
Listen, can you talk about how covenant, we'll use Greenberg's phrase, how does covenant live meaningfully and indefinitely online? Like, what's new about this conversation, like last year, it was a shutdown, it was a lockdown, and it was a one-year thing, and we all had a vision that the lockdown was going to end and we're going to go back. But if there's no going back anytime soon, if at all, how does, and now that horrible word indefinite, the I word, that this is indefinite, how does covenant live online indefinitely?
So I think that's something that is alive for every person. I think each one of us are figuring out what does it mean to be in relationship with God and relationship with Jewish community. And online, the way that that lives online indefinitely is where each one of us, you know, I met with someone that shared with me that they haven't been back and they're feeling guilty about being back. And
They're
about not
guilty about being back?
no,
Or not being back?
not being back. Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe about being back. I don't know. We haven't talked since then. No, but about feeling distanced and when I talked to them about their experience, right? Everything has been so vibrant, and they've found real spiritual dimensions, and real connections, and real emotional connections. They've had wonderful meals with people, and they've been building things. And so the guilt is like, I have this picture of what religion should be. I have this picture of what I should do, but I'm following my joy, not the oi. And I'm not just following obligation blindly. I'm doing what speaks to my heart. And so I think when we live out that kind of a covenant, we end up with a richer, more vibrant Jewish community. We end up in a place where people are feeling spiritually fulfilled and alive, and we then have to be really creative about how to bring people together. But I think that the covenant actually gets stronger, not weaker.
I think there's an age thing also. I think that for people that, I'm going to speak for myself, someone that's like my age and older, the pivot is harder. I can't wait to be back in the shul with 250 people marching around with lulav and etrog. On the other hand, I am still young enough to get the pivot and be able to, work within that. But there are people that it's really hard for people in this moment, in this stage, for people that are, I don't want to put out numbers, but people that are older that have a harder time connecting, literally connecting to the internet. I get these emails 5 times a week. How do I find this? How do I log into this? They're asking the wrong person.
Most of them come from me.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, Dan, what's a website? Yeah. Can I actually watch a service on a website? Yeah. So, Michelle, can I ask you a question, my dear friend? If Dan's vision of 250 people marching in person in the Rabbi Samuel Chill Sanctuary, may he rest in peace, with a lulav and an etrog in person, happily, is just indefinitely postponed. You're always so positive and optimistic and forward-looking and affirming, and yet you're also such a deep people person. You need people to thrive. So if Dan's vision of the 250 is indefinitely postponed, and if you need people, how can you be positive?
That's a question I ask myself every day. Look, a piece of it is what Aliza was speaking about. Look where we are, right? We're in a tent outdoors. We do what we can to be together. And the people who will be here in just a little while are super important to me. And all of you who are online, who send those emails and who make those contacts and who we run into in the grocery store and say, hey, I was thinking about what you guys all said at Talmud class. Like,
right.
All of that really matters, right? So I'm trying to rethink what people really means, right? And
Right.
how do we create those kinds of connections? Trying to be flexible and go with the flow, which is challenging and hard because rebuilding and recreating, I think even in Joshua's time, was really hard.
Right.
And also remembering that even when you get there, I really believe very strongly that there is no end in a life. There's no end in the Torah. We end on the other side. We're always reaching. And here in the book of Joshua, even, he reminds us here in verse 11, then you crossed the Jordan and you came to Jericho. But that's on the foundation. Back here, in verse 7 where he says, after you had lived a long time in the wilderness. And the roadmap of the Jewish tradition is to teach us how we live for a long time in the wilderness.
Okay, so here's my question for you. This is true and honest confession time. Are you, when you wake up in the morning, like when Simchas Torah is over and we're back with Parshat Bereshit, we're like the Israelites, we snap back to Genesis, and we have a new shul year, okay? Could you talk honestly about the morale that you bring to your sacred work and how you're feeling about it? Dan, we'll start with you.
I'm going to continue to bring every bit of my energy towards that. Whether I'm in person with the B'nai Mitzvah or online, which is most of the time, I'm just going to. I really just feel that my energy, my focus, is maybe even stronger now than it was 2 years ago, in terms of being able to, because it's so much more difficult to actually, in ways, to relate to people that you have to work harder at it. The screen versus person in the space in front of you.
Elisa, Michelle?
I'm super excited and energized. I think, I spend my time sort of, a good percentage of my time is teaching 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades and working with those teenagers and thinking with them about, like, how do we co-create a Jewish world that's vibrant and exciting, and trying to give them the tools that will enable them to live in this new world. And it's a really fun and interesting project with them. With the young adults, it's also a really interesting and fun project, right? They've already been living in this world that we're just entering for years of their life. And so joining them in that space and thinking together about what does it mean to build Jewish community, and then, imagining what does it mean? What does it mean to recreate a new world? I find so exciting and so interesting. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing not just where we end up, but how this process impacts our hearts.
I'm trying to decide whether to be honest or not.
Please, yeah. Please be honest. Please be honest.
So
Please be honest.
I love what you say, Annalise, and I feel it, right? I mean, there is so much creativity and so much opportunity. You only get better when you're pressure tested, and we're being pressure tested. So we are coming up with all kinds of creative solutions that I think are really beautiful and really meaningful, both personally and I think to a lot of the people that we serve. But the honest piece of this is that I'm hurting. I want my temple back. I feel like those who in our prayer service and the conservative movement cut part of this out, but this idea that we want to rebuild the temple, that you never understood, you want to go back to sacrifice, like, ew, who wants to go back to that? And yet I finally understand that. I understand, like, there was a world that I knew and loved and treasured, and it was a Shabbos dinner table filled with lots of families that I could invite to sit indoors and sing with me, and it was a full sanctuary, and it was a world that was so beautiful, and that I'm so afraid we're not going to get back. And that for me is why this book that you brought today is so helpful, because I think if we did have a holiday celebrating, yay, we made it, here we are in the land, I'd be really, I think the bottom would have fallen out of my psyche at this point. The fact that we have a template that Moses was still on the other side, and then Joshua got there, but there was still work to do, means that I still have work to do too. And I need to summon the Spirit to do it.
Thank you, Michelle. It's so beautiful. Lisa, Dan, so beautiful. I just want to end with this observation, and I'll answer my own question. My morale for the new shul year post-holidays has never been better or stronger or more optimistic. And I've been wondering, why is that? Because I feel every syllable of what you say, I feel. Like I miss people. I miss the intensity of the crowds. Like it was so tantalizing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to see hundreds of people again, and so sobering to think that we're not going to see hundreds of people again, for indefinite future. And so I saw it, and it was amazing, and I'm even with the mask, but it was amazing, and I miss it. So I feel everything you feel, and yet more optimistic and determined than ever, and I was trying to figure out why that is. So I think it has to do with the meaning of struggle, and that when you lose something, it's just deeply meaningful to try to recover it. And you take nothing for granted. It's like this community that we all love. We've lost the physical in person. We have online, and that's fabulous, but the in person and even the online is like it's a new baby. It's like we don't really know what it is. Like last year was like whatever, and this year now it's apparently for indefinite. And what is that? And so the meaning of our community is very much a work in progress, and we're working to recover it. And I think there is a lot of meaning to be had in working to recover something. And I also think that people really need a shul. They need their shul. Like we need our shul back, people need their shul back. And so working on doing that together is just ultimately fulfilling. Like it's the most fulfilling, other than raising a family, it's the most fulfilling thing I can imagine trying to invest my life in. Like it's hard, and it's a little indefinite what's going to be and how we're going to do it. But it's just so purpose-driven, and it's just so meaningful that that's what gives me my optimism, which is to be engaged in a project that 110%, heart and soul, blood, sweat, and tears, I believe there's nothing I'd rather do. There's no place I'd rather be. There's no work that's more important to me than figuring out how to rebuild Jewish community in 2021. Aliza, could we ask you to end with some song that captures this moment?
Olam chesed yivaneh, yananai, nananai. Please don't make me sing alone. Olam chesed yivaneh, yananai, yananai. Olam chesed yivaneh, yananai, yananai. Olam chesed yivaneh, yananai, yananai. I will build this world from love. Yananai, yananai. And you will build this world from love. Yananai, yananai. Then we will build this world from love. Yananai, yananai. And God will build this world from love. Yananai, yananai.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.